Stand-up historian. Those who tell stories rule society.
Hello and welcome to Stand-up Historian. My name is Kurosh and I bring this show to you from Seattle, Washington. Since the attacks between Israel and Iran has started and sort of a war is going on, I had 2 episodes. I received, just for merely expressing my opinion, I received a lot of hate and a lot of love. But what everybody needs to understand that a million message of hate goes away with one message of love and support. I appreciate both sides. I'm from the school that likes to let's talk about this situation. Tonight, I don't want to talk about war. I just want to give you a background, a historical background, draw a picture. And in this picture, I have been a witness in many of these events. It happened during my lifetime, half of it, and half of that was something that I was told by my father, and this is the personal part of the history. There is always written part, which who writes it, what kind of bias they have, and all that. I want to put all of those aside and just give you the facts of what has been going on in Iran and why Iran is important and why we are where we are. Where a very serious war with massive consequences is ongoing. I'm going to take you back to the time when Pahlavi dynasty, the last and longest continuous monarchy on earth, was toppled in a so-called Islamic revolution. And give you a little bit of background, and then we continue until we get today. I try to do this in one episode. If it's too long, I'm going to cut it into two or three episodes. But anyways, let's get to it. So, you know that in 1979, the last monarchy on earth, which was the Pahlavi dynasty of Iran, was toppled, and a religious man, Ayatollah Khomeini, came to Iran and changed the country to an Islamic Republic. And that is the moment of conception or inception of the disaster that you and I were watching going on and on the world scene. So before we get to the revolution, I want to give you a little bit of background about the Shah. Reza Pahlavi, the first king of Pahlavi, he came to power after a coup, and as a patriot, he served the country. There is a lot of stories about him. I don't want to get into those stories, but he was the person that tried to basically rebuild the country, protect the borders, and shut down a lot of rebellious different groups, different tribes, and different parties that they were fighting over different areas of Iran, and create a united Iran once again. Because Iran is composed of many ethnicities. It is not just Persians. So what you see as Persians, it's a central province in Iran called Fars in Arabic, or Pars, and that's Persia, basically. And there is something like 60% of people in Iran are Persians. So Reza Pahlavi, the first king, he established the country, the territories, the borders, made a lot of concessions with the neighbors, including Ataturk of Turkey, and created a new Iran. World War II happens. he is removed by the Allies because he's interested in Germany and specifically Hitler and his achievements. He even changed the country's name from what was called during the previous dynasty, which was Persian Empire. There are still letterheads that says Persian Empire or Imperatory of Pars, and officially changed the country's name back to its historic name, which is Iran or Land of Aryans. We don't want to get into any of those stories. But after his removal, several events happens, and his son becomes the next king. I'm going to jump over the government of Mossadegh and what CIA did in Iran and what John Dulles and others did to remove him and bring Shah back. We're not going to talk about all of this, although they are relevant because Iran, because of its geographical location and geopolitical position, it was extremely important and is. During the World War II, Iran became the bridge of victory for the Allies to supply Russia with weapons to fight Germans. After that and the birth of Soviet Union, Iran was an ally for the capitalist side of the war or Western side of the war to stop the spread of communism. So it's a very important country and it's an important region. There's a lot of energy export, and I don't want to get to those details, just give you a little bit of context here to understand why Iran is important. So Shah, the late Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza, he started what he called a white revolution or bloodless revolution, and distributed lands between farmers, and then he sent students outside of the country to get education, return and modernize the country. He opened the country and pretty much westernized a culture which, in hindsight, we look at it and we say that culture was not ready to become westernized. And westernization, in the eyes of Iranian, even today, is more, when you talk to the population, because there is an intellectual class, is freedom of action mainly, not freedom of thought, not freedom of expression, freedom in different areas and different meanings. It's a very shallow form of freedom that we're talking about here. So Shah didn't give people freedom of expression. He basically was suppressing freedom of expression. Nobody could write against the government or criticize the government or even scrutinize his government. But there was no mandatory hijab, covering of hair for women. There was women's rights and all sorts of other features that you see based on Western values. He brought those to Iran. And for a country that is deeply religious, Iran, last 50 years, many things has changed, but generally speaking, it's a country with 95% Muslims and majority are Shias. So now he brings this to a country that on one side has a very long border with Soviet Union, and Soviet Union trying to infiltrate Iran and support leftist, Marxist, communist, socialist groups and promote them inside Iran with the hope of uprising of proletariat inside Iran and instigating a revolution, a red revolution, like October Revolution in Iran. And that's the one side. Internally, Iran is religious, and there is a very strong clerics class that have more or less been against Shah and modernizations, including Western values such as freedom for women, even freedom to drink alcohol or whatever, or cinema or anything like this. They are extremely backward in their way of thinkings, and they don't believe in any of these things. But anyways, so you have the left, you have the religious groups, and you also have a large nationalist part of the population. And nationalism during the Pahlavi became very prominent because they started promoting what Persia was before invasion of Arabs, and tried to show to people that, because a lot of it been not lost but forgotten throughout the history, so many dynasties in short amount of times, different regions, different kings and different sultans. And so when Iran is again unified under Pahlavi and knows the borders and everything is settled, they start to tell people about their background, take them back to pre-Islamic era of Iran and tell them what's going on. So there are nationalists inside the country. For the most part, they support Shah, but at the same time, some of them, they don't like the fact that he is a puppet of the United States. That was the general understanding, that Shah is a puppet of the United States. But in any case, United States was in full support of Shah because he kept the region, and by the region I mean the Middle East, in relatively absolute peace, of course, except between Israel and its neighbors, which flared up sometimes. But Iran was among the first countries to recognize Israel as a country as soon as it announced its independence. And many Muslim countries didn't like it because apparently this is a Muslim country and that's a Jewish country. And there is a long history of Jews in Iran and many prominent Jewish people inside the Shah's government. Anyways, United States supporting Shah, and Shah is ruling more or less with an iron fist. Left is working really hard. They created different organizations, different parties. The most important, which was inside the country for a very, very long time, from the time of his father, is the party of Iranian masses, or in Persian is Hizb Today. Today is masses of people. So they infiltrated the government, they infiltrated the military, and there was a lot of party members inside the military officers and all that. So through infiltration, they were everywhere and openly supported by Soviet Union. They had very, very educated leaders. I was talking about intellectuals in Iran. And those intellectuals, when we look back, we see that many of them betrayed people. I think when you're an intellectual, you get to a point that you feel like, nobody understands what's going on. Why everybody is wrong? I'm right. This is better for my people. That's exactly what we see the role of Supreme Leader of Iran. Supposedly, what he decides, he has a direct communication with divine, and he knows what's better for people, not just for their worldly life, even for afterlife. So that's why it's so intrusive, this regime. But in any case, these intellectuals on the left undermined Shah, and at the same time, there are Muslim groups which started to arm themselves, and most important group is Mujahideen al-Khalq, which is known as MEK. And MEK started as an Islamic group. They got their trainings in Lebanon and with Palestinian Liberation Organization, Yasser Arafat and all that. And they used to go to Lebanon, get the trainings, come back to Iran, and literally pick up weapons and fight against Shah. They are responsible for execution of many Americans in Iran, military officers, attachés, and at different levels, because there was a very prominent presence of Americans in Iran. People of Iran are generally very hospitable, but this happened there. And Shah came down with an iron fist on them and would just killed a lot of them, many young, educated, extremely educated people among them. He killed some of them, he imprisoned the rest. And there are also nationalists, but because they are more or less aligned with what he wants, they have more room to wiggle, if you will. So now imagine this. He imprisons a lot of groups from the left, and there are Islamic groups such as Mujahideen and others. There are a few others. Fada'iyan al-Islam, that's another group. They killed many intellectuals, nationalist intellectuals that were writing against the teachings of Islam or criticizing Islam. They terrorized them. They killed a lot of them in bright daylight on the streets. And brilliant people, they killed brilliant people because they don't have the understanding that if you are talking about a religion, you should be able to defend it. First of all, doesn't need to be defended, but if you need to defend it or debate it with someone, maybe you should sit down and talk to that person. But it's not like that for many of these radicals. They just eliminate the other person. So now you have nationalists being attacked by Islamists with different groups of Islamists, which is Mujahideen, attacking Americans and openly fighting with Shah's regime. And you have the left, which Shah extremely hated the Reds, right? Just like what was in America. Better dead than red, same thing in Iran. So now all of these guys are controlled, tortured, arrested, imprisoned by Savak, which is Shah's secret intelligence service to control different opposition groups inside the country. They meet inside prisons and they start communicating. What came out of that was some Islamic groups, they adopted Marxist ideology and they combined it and they created the amalgamate of Islam and Marxism. Strangely, they find common grounds in many areas, such as egalitarian or people under oppression, they have the right to rise up against the oppressor and stuff like this. So, and these people are in prison. Now we have a character called Khomeini. The country of Iran has always been like a pendulum. This pendulum, it goes from one extreme to another. One extreme is always religious extreme. And when people get tired, this pendulum starts moving, but it never stops at to rest at its lowest point. It goes the other way, which is nationalism. Communists, they were very attractive for young people because of the conversations and intellectual conversations in there and talking about free people and how bad the capitalism is, how good the communism, this utopia that they would create. A lot of Iranian communists, they ended up in concentration camps and gulags in Soviet Union. Believe it or not, there is a history of those Iranians, they were actually died there and they became disillusioned by Soviet Union. But in any case, there are these groups in there, but never accepted by the majority of the people. They didn't like it. Part of it was propaganda inside the country, and the other part is Iranians love to do business with other nations, commerce, and have a private property, private life, and compete. And all these things are prohibited or denied from them if they look at communism, and they could see the difference between United States and Soviet Union. So they never had a very popular place among the people of Iran, except for students and young people. And probably you've heard that they say, if you are under 30 and you're not a socialist, you don't have a heart. And if you're over 30 and you're a socialist, you don't have a brain, which is absolutely right. So Islamic movement started by Khomeini, but he had also Islamic intellectuals building the foundation to establish a government on top of that. Khomeini was fairly uneducated person. If you listen to his conversation, I never recommend it. Boring, with just, it tells you that this man was filled with hatred and he couldn't put two sentences together that make sense. Later on, Iranians have an amazing sense of humor. They started making jokes about what he says and all of that. Long story short, he did not have this intellect to build something for a revolution, but other Muslim groups did, and including characters like Dr. Ali Shariati, they built something, and others, they started bringing conversations about Islam and how Islam could become the government. So now this is internal Iran. From outside, United States sees Shah as an ally, and he is keeping the region safe and sound, has built the 5th largest military in the world in that region, and pretty much rules that region. He's a friend of Israel, he's a friend to the United States, and he's fairly strong and formidable in stopping communism, spread of communism. But he started to show some signs that his father had shown in previous generation by expressing his support or his intention or his interest for Hitler. But for Shah, it was more nationalism than anything else. And there are many conversations that he talks about very famous American journalists and tells them that, yes, American media is controlled by the Jews. And this is 50 years ago that he's talking about. And he started criticizing West and raising the price of oil, so many different things. And he's waiting for his students to come back to the country and build a country he was always telling the people, we are moving towards the gates of great civilization. Just give me a few more years. But students outside Iran started to revolt against him. And with support from Carter administration and his CIA, and perhaps 2 or 3 other Western countries, not perhaps, for sure, they decided to remove Shah, and they said Shah must go. And this was the slogan that Khomeini also used, Shah must go. And revolution in Iran started. So it was not just a sudden grassroots movement, people come out. No, there was a background. A few years before that, there was some uprising, religious uprising. There was 1953. So all these things was simmering under the surface, but it was not the left. It was the religious group that came out and decided to actually took people to the streets and brought them to the streets under the flag of Islam, and how Islam is in danger inside the country by behavior of Shah. What happened with other groups, they came to support Khomeini. Everybody had a different agenda. So left was believing that, okay, we can sway this revolution afterward. And he promised them, Khomeini promised them, okay, there's going to be a fair referendum and people will decide what to do. None of that happened. And just like it happens in every revolution, the Iranian revolution ate its own children. Khomeini turned against everybody that helped him. Literally every group that helped him was completely destroyed, killed, executed, exiled, and imprisoned. There was nights that they were killing thousands of people in one night, and you could hear all through the night. I was 10 or 11 years old when the revolution happened, but I was almost 15 when the killings, 3-4 years after that, killings started. They would attack homes where these people live and just in the middle of the night kill everybody, and the next day you see bodies lined up. No, it was not like here, body bags, no. Bodies lined up to make an example for others, and then these groups started killing some of the current regime's supporters. So a really bloody era after 3-4 years after the revolution in Iran started, and Khomeini basically eliminated all of his opposition, not only offered freedom to Iran, but also took away many things that people had in the past. Very simple rights from women, like cover for women, or segregation of schools, universities was closed. But during the revolution, there's a short period of time, 2-3 years, before they can completely secure their position in Iran. There was this atmosphere of intellectual debates, conversations between different groups, Muslims and communists and nationalists and everybody else, people talking, and it was a very fertile ground for a lot of intellectuals and scholars that came out of that era in Iran, and they had high hopes for the country that this is great. We are building a new country based on equality for people, based on freedom of expression, and none of that happened. It turned out to be a nightmare. Shortly after that, once Americans realized that, and here's the important thing, the revolution happens and Iranians almost attacked every Western embassy in Iran. United States Embassy, 444 days in captivity. But the only embassy that was not touched in major powers of the time was Russian embassy. Nobody went there. Nobody. It was protected. British embassy, American embassy, and everything else. So now they realize that, okay, it seems like we created a Frankenstein here. This thing is not listening to us. It does what it wants, and what it does is destructive, not just to our interests. They don't care about anybody's interest. It's not aligned with us, and it started to export this radical ideology that Islam is a religion that can control and govern the whole world. I remembered, I give you these little anecdotes. When I was going to school, we had these notebooks, and everywhere you could see the propaganda. On the back of that, it says, it used to say, Islam is the only religion that can govern the whole world with peace. I never forget that. This is 50 years ago. So propaganda, very strong propaganda. They learned it from, they incorporated a lot of communist propaganda into their system. They learned how to do that. And so what would United States do? Provoke the neighbor, Iraq, with Saddam to, hey, time to do your duty and attack Iran. And Saddam attacked Iran, and it started in 1980. It started 8 years of bloody war with Iran. Millions of people died on both sides. And during that time, nobody had any rights in Iran, and under the cover of war and special circumstances, government killed thousands of people, over 150,000 people executed. For those who go Iran and go visit, ask your tour guide, not these days, take me to the section of the cemetery where all these dissidents are buried. It was mass graves. And I lost friends. They were executed by the regime for having one book or a publication. Bloody times in Iran for everybody. But one thing unites Iranian, and that is if enemy attacks them, like Iraq. And there's a history of animosity between the two countries, but it got to the point that Saddam said, okay, they're at the weakest point, I'm going to attack them and claim southern Iran, which is all the oil and gas reserves of Iran there. But in spite of everything that was going on inside the country, people came together and started defending the country. And Saddam, surprisingly, faced with such a powerful resistance that he could not really continue. And Iranians didn't have any weapons. Strangely enough, at that time, I'll get back to that in some other episode, Israel started supporting Iran by sending weapons and by sending ammunitions and by many different means, helping them in bombarding some areas of Iraq. So it was a very strange time. So Saddam failed, and the Western plot to get rid of this Frankenstein failed, but it helped the regime. Everything they do, it's like a virus or a tumor, a cancer tumor. The more you try to remove it, the more injections you give it, whatever you do, as if it absorbs all of that and expands and becomes stronger. So the regime became stronger during that after the 8 years of war, because they had the opportunity to basically kill every opposition that could possibly, inside and outside. There are records of Islamic operatives killing prominent politicians, Iranian former politicians from the previous regime or intellectuals in many European cities in bright daylight. You can go find those things. So now all the enemies are dead. They come out of this war much stronger. Khomeini dies, and the new guy, the new Ayatollah Khamenei, takes place. He was the least qualified person for this position. There is a video that they offer him and he says, who am I to be even considered for this? But anyways, for many different reasons, he became supreme leader, and he has absolute power based on constitution. There's only one body inside the system, Islamic Republic constitution, that could potentially scrutinize him, but it never happens because he selects the members of that. Imagine that. You get it? So there is a group of mullahs, the experts, they can decide who is going to be the next leader or supreme leader, but the supreme leader decides who are the members of this group. So, mind-blowing, right? But that's how democracy works. And during all this time, the West acted like a bunch of naive fools running around, and this cancer of Islamic Republic continued to grow. And soon they realized that they will face opposition from the West. Many attempts to remove them. There was killing of many of the heads of government in Iran in different explosions and all that. So a few smarter people inside the regime, they said, you know what, we can't continue like this. United States will remove us, and we have to find and establish proxies and basically distract them from what we are doing here. The distraction became Hezbollah in Lebanon, which put that country literally on fire for the last 30 years. In Syria, they started supporting Assad. And then, of course, Palestine. They never cared for Palestine. It's just an excuse for them to keep Israel busy, to attack Israel. And Khomeini came out and he said, Israel must be wiped off the map. This is a fact. This is not lost in translation. This is not misunderstanding. None of that. Israel must be removed, wiped off the map. So they need an enemy to constantly badger at that enemy, fight and blame that enemy for their shortcomings, for their failings. So that enemy became Israel. And they started establishing Hezbollah shortly after a revolution. The IRGC became more powerful and organized after the war. Many of those guys that fought in the 8 Years' War, they came out and they became generals in this new organization, very well organized, funded, and because the regime never, including Khomeini himself, they never trusted the regular military in Iran. They never trusted them. They created this parallel, strange organization. So if you want to see a similar system in history, it is like Wehrmacht in Germany and Gestapo SS. So SS is IRGC, Gestapo is their secret service, intelligence services, and regular military in Iran was Wehrmacht. And all the crimes committed by SS or IRGC. This is the best way I can explain what IRGC is. And IRGC is a terrorist organization in the United States. I believe it is still. It was, I don't remember who put them on that list, but regardless. So we are now dealing with this monster, with this creature that got out of control, started and thinks very smart, because the only thing that matters to this creature is survival. They start proxies in different countries near Israel, and I remember these things, a lot of it is just personal. They were talking about, we either fight on the streets of Damascus and Beirut or Tehran. And now you see where they are fighting. They brought the fight to Iran. They brought this disaster to Iran, because the moment Israel decided to put an end to Iran's proxies, the war came to Tehran and they're fighting there. And the corruption is a very important factor to talk about it here. There's so many stories. I can tell you so many stories of corruption in Iran to the core. But it was like the supreme leader freed their hands because he needs their loyalty. All these corrupt people, many of them, they'll have their children living in the United States, Canada, and Europe, and they just steal from the system. There was stories that they sell a tanker with oil on the waters, international waters, Iranian tanker, to some other group, and they take the money personally. It's just one of the most corrupt systems in Iran. So, but domestically, they could not continue suppression. So they started the movement to bring reformists. Khatami was one of them at the same time as Bill Clinton was in the United States. He came out and he pretended to be a reformist. And people believed that. Everybody lined up to vote for the reformist because we hate those other groups. He's better. And my point, my standing always, while I was in Iran and after I came out, said, if you have a dish which smells like crap, anything you take out of that, it smells like crap. So Islamic Republic and their characters are crap. It doesn't matter what label they put on them. They are from the same cabal. You cannot become a president or have an important role inside the government if you are not So if you are not an ally or zealot of the government, you cannot become anybody in that regime. So now you have reformist versus that. For a while, for 8 years, they had a reformist came out and talked about dialogue between civilizations and just a whole bunch of meaningless words. And after that 8 years came famous Ahmadinejad, right? Ahmadinejad came out and he repeated what Khomeini said. Israel must be wiped off the map. Keep saying it. And Western media and Western politicians, they say, oh no, they don't mean it. They don't mean it. Let me put you in a situation. Imagine you live in a very small country with 10 million people, and a country several times bigger than your country with 10 times more population, powerful military and everything else, and comes and said, I want to wipe you off the map. What would you do? You just sit back and say, well, let's pray that they don't do this. And you know the history of violence from these people. You know they send proxies to attack your little country. I'm not talking about anything. Israel, existence of Israel, that's a different conversation. I'm just saying the reality that happened. So reformists come, it doesn't work. Ahmadinejad comes, and all this time there are a little bit of uprising, and they completely oppress it. They kill people, they rape people. That's one of their techniques to just completely break the will of people. And they want them to go tell their stories, what happened to them. There is a famous prison in Iran, Karizak, in 2009, second term of the Ahmadinejad, when election was stolen. It's such a ridiculous term. Election was stolen, as if all the other elections was a free election. Yeah. So that they basically kidnapped a lot of young men and women. They raped them. They burned their bodies, and they scattered in the desert. And these are all documented. So you're dealing with absolutely inhumane system in Iran. But regardless, so they started opening the society a little bit, because they know Iranians are very much looking into the West, United States, Europe. Iran is fairly close to Europe. There is a lot of influence from there. The satellite programs started. So they opened the society, but the freedom was, what kind of freedom? They didn't give people the freedom of expression, freedom of publication, freedom of religion. None of that. It's like, okay, you don't want to cover your hair a little bit. They just turned a blind eye. They didn't even come out tell people. Or distribution of alcohol, not openly, but people could smuggle that to Iran. And Sepah, which is the IRGC, they started doing a lot of dirty work inside Iran and outside. They funded Hezbollah with drug money. Hezbollah and their history in Mexico with drug cartels in Mexico. There's just the tentacles of this regime is everywhere. Now, they open the society a little bit. Then comes the killing of Neda, and there is an uprising, and President Barack Hussein Obama basically takes side with the government in Iran. That uprising is completely destroyed and people oppressed again. And then comes the killing of Massa a couple years ago, another uprising, another chance to take this regime down. And every time it's more aggressive from the people, and they just say death to the dictator or death to the Khomeini or whatever. And also that one also is also crushed, basically crushed. And now the regime is all this time working feverishly to build an arsenal of ballistic missiles and also atomic weapons, nuclear weapons. There is no question that Iran wants to build nuclear weapons in my mind, because they see the model in North Korea, they see the model in Pakistan, and they say, we will be invincible, nobody can move us. And they always come back and say, oh, you know what? And these naive commentators in the West, many of them, I love them, with a lot of history, background, experience, knowledge, they just take it from their word and say, no, they don't want to build a bomb, because in Islamic jurisprudence, it's haram. They can't build a bomb. They don't know that Khomeini could come out, especially now after being pounded for several days and all his commanders are assassinated. He could come out and say, no, until now, nuclear weapons were forbidden based on Islamic law, but starting today, that's fine, build a bomb. So it's not like it's written on stone and it never changes. No, it's not like that. It's a joke among Iranians. If you ask them, they tell you so many jokes about group of people in the hell they're burning because they broke a law which was forbidden, and then some mullah on earth said, no, that's fine, you can do it, and they released them from the hell. There's a lot of jokes about this model that and how this thing works. So it's at will. Whatever they want to do, they do it.